Next Generation Food Systems Fall Speaker Series. My name is Hannah Bartram, and I am the AIFS Education and Public Engagement Coordinator. We are delighted to be kicking off our series today with a talk from Kimmo Makinen of Novozymes OneHealth. Before we get to the talk, I would like to begin by introducing the AI Institute for Next Generation Food Systems, also known as AIFS or AIFS. The Institute was established last year under a 5-year NSF USDA NIFA grant with the mission of developing and leveraging transformative AI for the ethical production and distribution of safe, sustainable, nutritious food with fewer resources. If you would like more information on the research and engagement activities of AIFS, please visit our website and connect with us on social media. AIFS is a collaboration between researchers at UC Davis, UC Berkeley, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, Cornell University, the USDA Agricultural Research Service, and UC Ag and Natural Resources. We are a multidisciplinary institute conducting research with a holistic, integrated view of the food system, solving challenges in molecular breeding, agricultural production, food processing and distribution, and nutrition, and focusing on the people behind the food system using AI and technology as an enabler. Our speaker series features thought leaders addressing food system challenges using artificial intelligence. And we hope that you will join us again for these future webinars. You can register for these events at the link at the bottom of your screen. And today we are delighted to welcome our first speaker of the speaker series. Kimmo Makinen heads up innovation at Novozymes OneHealth. And that is a biotech company in Denmark specializing in the development of microorganisms and enzymes. He is Finnish by nationality, but was educated in Scotland, where he earned a PhD in immunology in 2006. He then spent some time as a postdoc in the University of Oxford, following which he moved to the food industry by joining Nestle Research in Switzerland in 2009. There he led the development of probiotics for multiple health benefit applications for several years and joined Novozymes in 2018. Novozymes is a new entrant in the human health space, and as such has an opportunity to develop functional ingredients in a different and better way. AI is a part of this new approach, and today Kimmo will talk about that in the context of the challenges that are commonly encountered in the functional food and ingredients industry. There will be time for questions at the end, so I would encourage you to submit your questions throughout the talk in the Q&A section. And just so you know, there's also closed captioning available. Welcome, Kimmo. Go ahead and take it away.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, put it in the presentation mode. Yeah, so hey everybody, greetings from Denmark here, about 20 miles north of Copenhagen. It's 7 o'clock in the evening here. Today I'll have the pleasure of presenting you a topic, challenges in functional foods and ingredients and their discovery and how AI could change the game. And just as a disclosure, I'm not an AI specialist per se. I'm a biologist or an immunologist by training, but of course I'm in the business of trying to discover new health beneficial ingredients. And I will speak from that perspective and, highlighting opportunities where AI could make a difference in this talk. Let me see how I can change the slide here. Yeah, okay. Yeah, just a word about Novozymes in case you probably don't know it. It's a well-known company here in Denmark, but not necessarily around the world. Around 6,000 employees. We are present globally in many places. We even have an office in Davis, California, over there on the other side of the motorway. And in terms of enzymes and microbial solutions, we're very dominant. We have a high market share in that particular, terrain using microbes and enzymes for industrial applications. We have tens of thousands of microbes and hundreds of millions of enzymes. So a big, a bag of tools at our disposal to develop health beneficial ingredients. But it was only in 2017 that we decided to enter the terrain of human health and develop our microbes as probiotics and enzymes also for human health applications. And as Hannah said, there is a good side to being a new entrant to the business because we don't have a legacy per se, and we have the opportunity to develop things a little bit differently. And AI, as Hannah said, is going to be part of this doing things differently. The kind of challenges I want to talk to you about today in the discovery of functional foods are listed here. I think overall, the whole domain of functional foods and probiotics needs a bit of a facelift in terms of quality of science and also the perception of this domain in the eyes of the consumers, the scientists, and the public in general. Challenge number 2 is finding the right idea and physiological targets to go after is actually quite difficult, and I want to talk to you about that. Number 3 is that one size fits all solutions just won't cut it going forward. We need to be a little bit more precise in our offerings and not just say that everybody needs the same thing. There are individual differences. And if I have time, I'll also make a few comments about that the data available today are not necessarily good enough, and we may have to focus on generating better data to enable AI then to help us make better decisions. And I'll come from the perspective of probiotics and enzymes, but I think all these discussions are equally applicable to functional foods, fermented foods, phytochemicals, you name it. Challenge number 1, functional foods and ingredients need a facelift. Well, one observation is that currently marketed products in the consumer health do not meet the aspiration of consumers in an increasingly demanding marketplace. Consumers are interested in how they can improve their health, what is actually scientifically substantiated, and they're looking for those kinds of solutions. But if you go down to your local, health food store or even Walmart and you go to the supplement section, you will simply see there's too much choice. It's confusing, but there's probably too little science behind a lot of these offerings, and consumers are starting to maybe lose a little bit of confidence in all the offerings that are out there. And also, there's certainly no consideration of individual needs, and you will just have to buy whatever is available there without knowing whether it will precisely work for you. When I'm talking about functional foods and nutraceuticals, specifically, I refer to things that have health benefits, not so much things that are, for your metabolic requirements and things like that, but health beneficial ingredients. And like I said, this here will focus on probiotics and enzymes simply because that's the business that I come from. And what do I mean by AI in this talk? So, well, AI is a bigger umbrella that could have a number of computational approaches under it, machine learning, data science, big data, bioinformatics, everything coming under the umbrella of AI. And sometimes I talk about data science and AI also interchangeably. I mean, AI and data science, some people say that the only purpose of data science is to support better decision making. If it's not used for that purpose, maybe it's not real AI or real data science in the way that at least I mean it today. Now, industries that stand to lose big time have been embracing data science and AI for some time now, and it's just the part of the way of doing things now every day, because bad decisions just have catastrophic consequences. Like, for example, in the travel industry, a bad decision could mean that flights are not on time, there's chaos, people get angry. In healthcare, bad decisions could lead to lives lost. In credit and insurance and financial businesses, people stand to lose money and they don't like to lose money. So these kinds of industries, data science and AI is almost like a given. But certainly also my industry, which is functional foods and ingredients, could benefit from tools to enable better decision making. Because if you look at, for example, what's happening in Europe in terms of health claims, what companies and products can communicate directly to consumers about the health benefits, the picture is not very rosy. Whilst I think in the USA, you can say quite a few things to consumers about the potential health benefits of your products, provided you have a little asterisk and saying FDA didn't evaluate this. In Europe, it's tightly regulated. And any health claim has to be approved by the European Food and Safety Authority called EFSA. And that's a very stringent but a fair process, I would say. If you look at the stats, I just did a little look a few days ago to get updated. On the left here, you see the batch of health claims that were submitted in 2008. That was the first batch when the regulation came into process. More than 2,000 were submitted, but only about 10% of those were actually approved to be allowed to be communicated to the consumers. Now, subsequently, also many companies have submitted health claims, but even a smaller proportion, maybe about 5%, shown here in the middle, have been actually approved. Everything else has been rejected. Maybe a quarter of the disease risk reduction claims, like plant sterols reducing cholesterol, then reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease. Those kinds of claims, quite a few have been accepted. But the problem here is that EFSA has said, hey, mostly the clinical evidence is not strong enough, and also the mechanism of action that links the actual ingredient to the health effect was not understood well enough, which can also cause you to fail in health claim application, right? So clearly there's a big opportunity to improve the quality of science in this particular domain of functional foods and ingredients. Because right now, if you look at some sort of articles and headlines, I think functional foods are getting a bit of a bad name. Depends on where you're reading, but you can read that probiotics are hype, they're useless, they don't work, And similarly, in other types of ingredients, I think are getting a lot of flack, and people can be losing confidence. But that doesn't have to be the case. And I think AI can make a big difference here to provide the whole industry a bit of a facelift. Pharma. Let's talk about pharma for a second, because of course, pharma has also had their own struggles, right? Pharma has been pouring, money down over the years, all kinds of rabbit holes that never led anywhere, right? But they have started to now embrace AI as a way to make better decisions, to create better, stronger, more likely to succeed innovation pipelines. And therefore, all the sort of major pharmaceutical companies, you find partnerships with all kinds of AI, computational biology, information technology companies for various purposes. Pharma is using AI and data science to discover drugs fast. I read a quote that it can save time from actual, idea to the clinical study fourfold. So that's a big time saving. It can improve clinical trial success by helping you design better trials, also stratify participation better. So you only pick those people who will respond to your intervention. You can also then target specific patients with your offering. So you can give your drug to those who actually need it and respond to it. You can also have better insight into patient behavior, into better pharmacovigilance with the help of AI and data science, and also gain insight into marketing and sales performance. I think all of these things can also be more or less applied to the domain of functional foods and ingredients. I just took this screenshot from the Exscientia website, which is one of these AI service providers, and they say that in the future, all drugs will be designed with AI, right? Now, why not also nutraceutical and functional foods? That's something I added there myself. That's my question, because drugs or functional foods, so ingredients, all we want to do is improve human health, and human health comes with an underlying physiology, and their AI can help to make the link between the ingredient, physiology, and health effect in drugs, as well as in the nutraceuticals and functional foods world. And true enough, these partnerships that are already common in pharma, similar, are now starting to emerge in the food domain. right? Here are some examples. Nuritas, I believe, is based in Davis, California, has been making a lot of partnerships. There's some success stories with their partnership with BASF, where they used their peptide library to discover a peptide that was effective at anti-inflammation, and BASF then launched it successfully. Brightseed and Danone. Brightseed has a huge library of natural ingredients, which they can mine using AI, and Danone can then commercialize some of these ingredients. So these things are starting to emerge. There are only a few of them available to the public eye today, but it is definitely a space that is heating up. Here are some of the headlines of these partnerships that I just mentioned. And these are, of course, the ones we can see, but then under the iceberg, you have a lot of stealth mode developments, which will only be visible to us in the years to come, but they are definitely happening today for a good reason, because simply with AI, we can lift the credibility of this particular space, and people no longer have to say things like, hey, I don't take probiotics because I don't believe in them. I don't believe in functional foods. I mean, it shouldn't be a matter of belief. It should be a matter of data. Does it work or does it not work? I mean, nobody ever says, I don't believe in aspirin. I don't believe in ibuprofen. I don't believe in paracetamol. It just never gets said, because people simply look at the data, and that's how they make their decisions. And I think that's where we also headed in functional foods, and AI will definitely be paving the way. So challenge number 2, right? This is a tough one. What to do in the first place? What to target to achieve the health benefit, right? Now, one thing that you have to, of course, achieve in order to make this decision, you have to find the innovation sweet spot, if you like, right? So in green, you have to figure out what is the physiological target, what are the scientific insights that should be considered here. But those have to then overlap with the consumer insights. What do people actually want and are willing to pay for? And then in blue, all of this has to then overlap with the business and competitor insights. You know, what's available in the market? What is the cost? You know, where could you compete? You know, what's the IP landscape? All of that kind of thing. And when these overlap, maybe that's the opportunity area you should be focusing on. In terms of the scientific insights, right? One of the things that has been plaguing, especially the probiotic space, is what we call this mechanism of action black boxes, right? You often find that a probiotic strain that was tested in a clinical trial, even if it achieved some efficacy, right? People can't explain how, because there's this massive black box that is blocking out whatever is happening in the middle, right? What we would like to do differently is to take away the black box, right? And say, hey, here is the point in the physiology that we want to make a difference, because this is truly going to improve that person's health. So it's exactly like a pharma approach, where you would find a druggable target and you go after that. So that is the aspiration of becoming far more precise in the development of functional ingredients and probiotics. But you know, sometimes it's easier said than done, right? Because whilst you have health benefits shown here on the left, like, you know, for which you can probably intuitively more or less figure out what the mechanism of action that is relevant is, like lactose intolerance. Okay, you want to break down lactose using maybe some enzymes. Dental biofilms, similarly, you know the composition of biofilms. You just design a combo of enzymes that could break them down. That's one way to do it. Similarly for wheat, maybe there's some carbohydrates there you want to neutralize. C. diff infection, maybe there's a specific way to mop out the pathogen or kill it, and so on and so forth, right? But then on the right, you have all these complex benefits: stress, anxiety, immune benefits, chronic pain, glucose management, respiratory infections, cognitive decline, you name it. It's not so obvious what is the MOA or the mechanism that is relevant here, and understanding that and finding that becomes a bit of a research question or a piece in its own right, so you can then head down the right path. And I think AI will have a huge role to play there. And maybe it's for this reason that it's not so easy to find the right mechanism to go after, that research productivity apparently is falling over the years. It's halving every 13 years, according to this study done here. So ideas are getting harder to find because maybe all the obvious stuff has already been done. Right. So whilst the number of researchers are going up over the years, research productivity is going down. I mean, of course, it could be this for the simple reason that instead of working, people are spending their time watching funny cat videos on YouTube, but that's probably not the whole explanation. There's clearly something else going on in here, and it's just difficult to land on that mechanism that you should be then going after, especially in the sort of a functional foods and ingredients domain. But in companies like where I work, of course, you are faced with the fact that you have to fill the innovation pipeline. You know, it's your duty to do so, and you have to figure out a way to do it. So how do you fill the innovation pipeline? I guess the default approach, if you are playing the game Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and you don't know what to do, you can always use your lifelines, you can call a friend, you can ask the audience, or you can go for 50-50. Similarly, in the game of Who Wants to Be a leading science-driven consumer health company, do something similar. You could ask your colleagues what to do, what do they know? You could ask your favorite professor, do they have any cool projects you could maybe develop with them? You could go to conferences to get ideas, so you could read publications. Now 50-50 is not available to us. Maybe with AI, one day you can even go for 50-50, but today you have to ask around and you have to tap into the knowledge that is already in existence in somebody's head, or perhaps in publications to get your idea. Now, one problem relying on publications is this, however, is the reproducibility of the results that others have generated. Now, somebody did this study a few years ago and published it in Nature. They asked a bunch of people, a bunch of scientists, what do you think about the reproducibility of science these days, right? Is there a crisis or not? And the vast majority of people said there's a significant crisis, or at least a slight crisis in reproducing people's findings. Now reasons cited were selective reporting in publications, pressure to publish, low statistical power, not replicated enough in original labs, and so on and so forth. So the problem here is that if you simply take a publication and then use that as a basis of creating a multi-year, multi-million-dollar, tens of millions of dollar worth project, you might just be in for a surprise when it comes to crunch time in the clinical study, because you can't replicate what others found. So one of the potential ways around this is, of course, to do a bit of your own data crunching using bioinformatic and AI approaches. You could identify public or proprietary data. Several studies shown here: study A, study B, study C, just for the sake of this presentation. For example, you could take studies where the genetic profile, or let's say microbiota profile of a group of individuals who have a particular health condition or a disease is then compared against the control group, right? And you then generate these big pools of data of diseased microbiota or genes, and then similarly from the control group. And you do the comparison using various computational approaches, and then you arrive at something you might call the delta microbiome, which is then the microbial differences between healthy and diseased, or delta transcriptome, metabolome, proteome, or pathways, depending on the kind of data you have available here. And those differences, of course, whilst they are just correlations, could give you some clues about potential targets of interventions or mechanisms that you could maybe impinge on with your ingredients to make a difference on a person's health. So that's one way of avoiding, going around single laboratory bias and these publication biases to generate your own big data sets. So with this kind of an analysis of multi-omics human data, in number one, you can of course answer the question, what to do, what to target. And then you can go through the whole target validation, so on and so pathway to end up with the actual lead compound or lead probiotic. But in number two here also, because now you clearly understand the mechanism, you understand more about the how to do the actual validation and the assays. So when it comes to your sort of validation funnel, you can be far more precise as to what sort of properties you should look for and test for. And when it comes to clinical studies in number 3, you're far wiser in terms of who you should recruit into clinical studies, right? Don't just recruit everybody with a particular condition. You're now in a position to look at a biomarker profile and be smart about your participant stratification, so you can get the right people to come in and they're more likely to respond, so you have a higher chance of success. And also, if you use strong AI approaches, you'll probably have a stronger concept in the first place, right? And of course, if you have a strong concept, you're more likely to succeed. And also, finally, at the bottom here, in terms of regulatory approval, if you have a crystal clear understanding of your mechanism of action and what your thing actually does, you have a far better chance of convincing, tough audiences like EFSA that you should actually get that health claim. So it helps you a great deal in that regard as well. Overall, some publications are now, in fact, calling for a new innovation paradigm, if you like. Current paradigm being that everything starts with the generation of a hypothesis. And generation of a hypothesis could come from the kind of things that I just mentioned, people's pet projects and ideas, professors, literature that you just happen to be aware of. And that's all great, but the reality is that if you just rely on that, you will only see whatever is shown through this lens here. You will see part of the things that are out there, but you will never see the whole thing, right? So what's called for now is a revised paradigm, where before you generate a hypothesis, you would use AI-driven approaches to explore existing public and proprietary data to get the kind of data in front of you that helps you make a far better decision and far better hypothesis, which in turn is then more likely to result in a project and a product that actually works, right? So this is all about choosing what is the right thing to do. It's not so much about how do we do things more efficiently. Of course, AI can help there, but it's all about making the right decision in the first place. So finally, just to make this point here that yes, omics data, is one thing we can crunch with AI, right? But there are many other things we can crunch with AI. We can use text mining to mine publications available on PubMed. We can use natural language processing algorithms to do so, right, and get far better insights that you will ever get by just doing your own PubMed searches. You could similarly mine patient health records, provided you have access to them through some hospital systems who make them available, maybe, but also consumer insights. In our company, we have a lot of consumer insights interviews, which we've now turned into text transcripts, annotated them with keywords, which we can then mine for insights and sentiments and all that. And you could also try to find some material on the web. You could try to scrape some consumer reviews of products and do sentiment analysis on those. You could look at Google Trends, and similarly here in the business and competitor insights, you could try to see just text mining market reports and internet. What's the competition doing? What's the best price point for your product? What are the IP opportunities? What are the regulatory opportunities? And with AI, you can try to bring all of this together and arrive at this integrated, also partially quantified opportunity in terms of your probability of success that you can then go after, which you could never do if you're just trying to do it using your human intelligence. There's just too much data, and also the data is far too diverse. So that was challenge number 2 around what to do in the first place. Now, challenge number 3 is that one size fits all solutions just won't cut it, going forward. What you see here is actually our part of our OneHealth Novozymes team. These are real team members, and they kind of all are, you know, different personalities, but also, even though we are all kind of part of the same species, you know, we all have individual differences. And whilst I'm not proposing that everybody needs absolutely a different solution, but I think there's still a sort of a middle ground where we make precision nutrition offerings without being completely 100% personalized, right? And that's what I wanted to make a point about in the following slides. Let me use, for example, IBS as an example, right? IBS, which stands for irritable bowel syndrome. It's the most common functional gastrointestinal disorder with global prevalence of 5 to 20%. So it's fairly prevalent. It's hard to manage. It's a chronic condition with no cure, with an average duration of symptoms of 18 years. So it really hangs around with you for a very long time. And it's not a very nice companion because it causes abdominal pain, it causes bloating, constipation, diarrhea, anxiety is also associated with IBS. And yeah, so not surprisingly, then it has a severe negative impact on the quality of life of those IBS sufferers. The tricky thing about IBS, it's a multifactorial syndrome. Well, I guess that's why it's called the syndrome, and it's also poorly understood. Now here on the left, you know, it just highlights that there's a kind of a central brain component to IBS. Something that is happening in people's minds can drive how they feel in the gut, so it can drive IBS symptoms. But there are also some several, you know, triggers or causative factors that are actually centered in the gut. For example, dietary components can trigger IBS symptoms. Microbiome dysbiosis is also implicated, increased intestinal permeability. Immune function can be perturbed also in the gut, causing IBS, and there can be visceral hypersensitivity and changes in gut motility. So all of these coming together or acting individually in various combinations can then culminate in what we know as IBS. But also as a kind of clinical phenomenon or a clinical appearance, IBS presents in different ways. So you have IBS that is dominated with diarrhea, you can have IBS that is constipation dominated, and then you can have the mixed version where you sometimes have diarrhea, sometimes you're constipated. And also looking at the individual microbiota compositions or of IBS sufferers or groups of them, you find that there are certain clusters of microbiota that emerge, and those clusters do not actually then completely match the clinical presentations, right? So there's quite a lot of things going on, and to suppose that you will create one solution that will just in a blanket fashion treat everybody with IBS, it's probably not very likely. So what we have to do, and that's probably only using AI-related technologies, you can try to understand IBS sufferers in a far more granular fashion, and then make more precise offerings to actually help people. I think it's possible, but it just requires a lot of data and a lot of crunching of that data to understand them better. Similarly, in diabetes, right? There was this paper that came out a couple of years ago in Lancet that showed that if you look at adult onset diabetes people, right, you actually realize that there are several subgroups there, and those subgroups probably require different kinds of therapeutic approaches as well. So shown here on the left in that pie chart A, you see that previously, people were just simply classified as having type 1 diabetes or late onset adult diabetes or type 2 diabetes. And then the treatments would be given accordingly. But then the new classification, which is based on a far better understanding of the patient, of the, how they are in terms of medical history and all kinds of other sort of biological parameters, what they define now is 6 subgroups of patients, right? And each of these probably requiring a slightly different approach. And if you're able to provide that kind of an approach, then of course you have better treatment outcome. And similarly now trying to say, hey, I'm just going to come with this one size fits all type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes solution. That may not be the best way to do going forward. So we have to understand subgroupings within the recipients of functional foods and ingredients to be able to make that truly effective offering that people can actually then benefit from. And by the way, that's a typical thing that you also see in probiotic clinical trials. If you look at the data carefully, there's always a subpopulation of people who respond and then a population that do not respond in a lot of the trials. And there's probably something like this going on. There could be many reasons, but one reason is probably that we didn't quite understand the recruited population well enough to say, you are the guys who should take part in the trial because you are the ones who will actually benefit from this intervention. And final point about this is that also when you look at gut microbiota, all right, there's an interesting paper that came out some years ago here, cell host and microbiome, showing that the resident gut microbiota can be more welcoming to some probiotic strains than to others, right? So, so in this study, the researchers took a group of people actually, and they just wanted to see, they gave them this Bifidobacterium longum probiotic strain to see if it would persist in their guts. What you typically see in probiotic studies is that probiotics given to people don't really colonize if you look at the population in general, right? Usually if people stop taking probiotics, they get washed out of the system and they are not detectable anymore, maybe in a week or 2 weeks maximum. But in these studies, they found that there was a subgroup of people, I think up to 30% of people, in whom this bifidobacterium persisted for up to 6 months after administration. And that was a big surprise. Then they dug a little deeper into this, right? And they found that in these so-called persisters that are shown here on the right, in the gut ecological niche, there was an underrepresentation of the species B. longum in general. So now when you come in with the new B. longum, it maybe has a little bit more ecological niche around there that it can take hold of. It's not so crowded in terms of its exact similar bacteria. And also there was an underrepresentation of genes for carbohydrate utilization. And this B. longum liked to utilize those kinds of carbohydrates. And now they were available, and also generally higher resource availability. So in those 30% of people, the niche had an opening that then allowed this probiotic strain to establish itself for around 6 months. Now, of course, we could have a debate about whether establishment of probiotic strains is needed for the health benefit that the probiotic brings, and that probably is a bit of a case-by-case discussion. But there is certainly something in here, and we would probably be better off if we did understand the microbiota composition of the person that is then supposed to take your probiotic, so that there's some kind of a niche compatibility that we can design into this. So this is a bit of a sort of a blue skies dream here, but maybe not completely, because in choosing what we should do as individuals, so what we should take as individuals in terms of foods and food supplements going forward, I think AI is going to have to play a big role, all this data analytics in the future. So if we are in a position of feeding into a system our gut microbiota profile, maybe microbiota profiles from other body sites as well, metabolic profiles, maybe blood biomarkers. If it becomes very easy to take a blood sample and get a full biomarker profile, we could feed that in genomic data, of course, and then data in terms about, what is our activity levels, like how well we sleep, what do we eat, and even what sort of things we are exposed to from the environment in terms of pollution and all that, and all that kind of stuff, right? So maybe one day, maybe not so far in the future, the AI engine could recommend us what to eat. What supplements do I have to take? What supplements and dietary combinations make sense to me, right? Do I even need supplements? Maybe I don't need supplements, right? And what behaviors to change? They could be those kinds of recommendations as well, right? And now, of course, we can already do this sort of thing in terms of gut microbiota. There's services available. People can have their gut microbiota sequenced, and there will be recommendations made on the basis of those results, what foods you could eat or what supplements you could take. But I think we'll need this whole gamut of all kinds of data to get to more accurate suggestions of what to do with our diets and supplement intakes. So let me finally make a little comment about the data availability today, right? And that's my final point before I summarize. In terms of data, yeah. So there's certainly a rise of cohorts in human health. There's a lot of different, participant cohorts all over the world where data is being collected from individuals over many years, and it can actually amount to quite a lot of data. So potentially there is a lot of material for data approaches and data scientists and data science companies to get busy with and derive insights from. One of the problems, especially when it comes to microbiome relevant cohorts in human health, is that even though collectively there's a lot of human participants in all of these gut projects shown here, for example, primarily they are based on 16S sequencing, which is a type of microbiota characterization technique, which is okay, but it doesn't quite provide the same kind of resolution that other methods could do. And also these data sets tend to miss metabolomics. They tend to miss metaproteomic data, and also the metadata, which is all these questionnaires about human health tend to be inadequate, right? So that's the one downside of relying on publicly available data, right? So what would be better? Is that instead of doing the 16S RNA gene sequencing approach to generate data, because the 16S only looks at the specific, let's call it the barcode within the genome that then denotes what genus the bacterium is, it doesn't give you further resolution. But instead, on the right here, whole genome sequencing, which actually then, as the name says, sequences the whole genome of bacterium, will tell you what that bacterium is on the strain level. So you have all the deep information about the microbiota, which is actually very important, right? But that is a far more expensive approach, and it's not sort of used as a rule in the public domain. So often you are still saddled with this 16S data if you simply rely on public data. So I expect that companies going forward will more and more start to generate their own data sets. Maybe they will start partnering up with the cohorts, or create their own sort of microbiota servicing things, relying on whole genome sequencing just to get to the kind of data that they will mostly or benefit from for their innovation purposes. Also, this is just an example of some real life stuff. One slide here that we did. We partnered up with an AI company, and we looked at publicly available data for a particular health condition, right? And even though, initially we found 53 publications that were reviewed for this purpose, where then 43 actually had 16S microbiota data sets associated with them, then applying stringent quality control measures, you end up weeding out majority of these publications. So you started with 43 and you ended up with 10 that were then able to, or could be, compiled into a meta-analysis for the purposes of this exercise here. So the point is that even though it may seem like public domain has a lot of data sets, it's not always something you can use in the final analysis. So the more we can generate data as companies, the better. And also, maybe if some of you are in the business of generating data for potential clients like us, right? I think it's a good idea to maybe have discussions with the would-be clients to know what kind of a data would a company want to use in the future, right? So finally, bringing it all together, right? I think the kind of a vision that that one needs to have as an innovation company, and how we can change the game maybe with AI in the functional foods and ingredients, is to have this approach where you first have AI driving the generation of hypotheses, then helping you in number 2, identify candidate solution, and then number 3, evaluate solutions in various studies, right? So going into the hypothesis generation phase here in 1, you need your various public and proprietary source inputs like the omics, the scientific data, clinical trial data, literature data, regulatory IP, market data, consumer insights. And with the kind of approaches that I kind of touched on earlier, you can then generate strong data-driven hypotheses. You can then in step 2, if you have a collection of microbes or enzymes or any ingredients or dietary approaches, whatever it is, you can then match those hypotheses and the insights or the needs with what you have in your bag of tricks, right? Maybe there's a specific mechanism of action. Maybe there's a specific metabolite that you need to be able to provide in form of your functional ingredient. And that's what you will look for in step 2. And in step 3, you will, of course, put everything to a test. You will do your whatever model systems are relevant. And finally, a stratified clinical study where you will recruit those people you expect to respond to your intervention. So with this kind of an approach, well executed, I think we can definitely change the game with AI. So just to finish off with, that's what I started out with the challenges. And yes, I think AI can help us lift the image of functional foods and ingredients to the level, I don't know if I should say to the level of pharma, but certainly to the level where they are perceived as serious data-based interventions and can actually benefit the people in terms of their health. Number 2, I think AI will definitely be the way to find the right ideas and physiological targets. I think there are so many precedents already in the pharma world, and some are starting to emerge in this domain as well. It is clear in number 3 that one-size-fits-all solutions are probably going to be replaced by some more precise offerings. And to get to that point, of course, you need AI and data science approaches. And then finally, I believe that the data today has to improve in quality if it's to enable all of this in this domain. And so just to finish off with, I think the vision should be to have AI and data science at the center of everything we do, whether it's understanding consumers, identifying mechanisms of action, doing the competitive and IP landscaping, identifying the best ingredients, best clinical trial participants, and finally making precise consumer offerings. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you for that insightful presentation. We have time for some questions, so I would encourage our audience to add questions to the Q&A section, and we have a few here that I will ask of you. And I did want to also add that this talk is being recorded and it will be posted in a few days to our YouTube channel. So if you missed any part or want to revisit it, it will be available to you at a future date. So let's start with this question that was, are ideas getting harder to publish rather than harder to find? Was relevant to an earlier part of your talk.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I suppose it could be either, but I'm at least in my job, it feels like it is getting also harder to find these ideas. But I don't know exactly what drives that particular graph there, right? So, but the point is though that regardless of what is driving that, innovation is still hard, right? And landing on a great idea still is a big effort.
Okay, thank you. And then this next question is about how to use AI in personalized nutrition, such as providing personalized dietary pattern or suggesting usage of certain nutraceutical products.
Yeah, I think, yeah, there was one slide that I didn't go through, but I had prepared it earlier. I think it has to come down to something that you as an individual are truly interested in your personalized regime, whether it's, food, exercise, and combinations of those, then you should probably give a lot of data. You should probably be interested in knowing about your microbiota composition in the gut or elsewhere in your body, maybe your genetics, maybe your nutrigenomics, if that's available, and just try to, on that basis, find some recommendations that seem to be make sense to you, right? I think that's probably the best way to get to a personalization. I don't necessarily believe that an individual company is in a good position to provide a fully personalized solution. So it's more like up to the consumer to design and tailor make that solution based on biomarker data, right? And then find the right products, maybe using some kind of a recommendation engine that will then make a difference. That would be my suggestion, at least.
Great, thank you. This is a question from the chat. There's a huge number of microbiome companies, for example, in the Bay Area, that are all mining data vigorously. Some are generating neural nets, mixing mined data with synthetic, computationally generated data, but they need models to constrain the NN, so-called PNNs, physically constrained NNs. Are these prevalent in the IBS or microbiome world?
Not sure if I'm, in with the lingo. NN and PNNs. What does it mean in this case?
Oh, neural nets, I believe.
Oh, is that what it is? Yes. Okay. Right. Are they prevalent in the IBS and micro world? I would say not yet. It's not something I run into, right? At least in this. But it could be. I'm not an expert in this. I don't know what neural nets could bring into this this particular question. But they could. I'm sure there will be people in this audience who might have an answer to this. But I don't know. I don't see them. But what they could bring that I don't know.
Great. And we can always continue this conversation when we revisit these topics in our December panel. We'll be bringing back Kimmo and our other speakers to have more in-depth conversation there across various fields. Next question, how would an individual with IBS get involved in clinical trials?
Yeah, so if I understand the question correctly, is how do you maybe recruit? Well, I can answer the the various questions. So typically, such people would probably see an advert, right? That we are looking for people with these kinds of symptoms. Come and be seen by a physician who is participating here. That's one way. If you have certain symptoms like the bloating, constipation, if you're self-diagnosed IBS, then you can go into a doctor's office who is recruiting, and then you could maybe get recruited into the trial. But it's usually on the basis of physiological symptoms or clinical symptoms rather. It's not really a biomarker profile based recruitment. Usually it's just what you feel, right? And then there's probably going to be a bit of an exclusion that will happen as well. They would want to know that you're not simply lactose intolerant or non-celiac gluten sensitive or something like that. You don't have an IBD and that kind of thing. So then when all of that is excluded, maybe then you are considered IBS and you might be recruited, right? So that's probably the typical way.
Great, yeah. Thank you for that answer. What is the biggest challenge when you tried to adopt AI in your business? And what's the biggest change we will see in the way we create and use functional foods in the next 5 years?
Biggest challenge is that but it's a new thing in Novozymes, like AI, and especially, I mean, it's always introducing something new that is sometimes also a little bit difficult to communicate, right? You know, what is AI? What is the data science, right? And if people have never heard about that before, you know, it takes quite a lot of, you know, salesmanship and, you know, convincing to get people to adopt these new approaches, right? I think it's a lot to do with that, and also because especially biotech companies can feel that they have it all covered already, right? They may have some aspects of AI. They may have bioinformatics. They may know how to look at microbiota data, right? And they say, hey, that's all there is to it. That's all we need to do, right? Whereas the bigger landscape of AI opportunities are then something that they may not appreciate. So it takes quite a lot of, you know, discussion to get people on board at all levels, and then supporting these previously, you know, less well-known approaches in your company. That's what I've at least faced. And what was the biggest challenge in the next 5? Change, I think.
Change, yeah. The biggest change we will see in the way we create and use functional foods in the next 5 years.
The way we create functional foods, I think it will be that I think companies will want to be data driven. You know, they will want to see that there is a strong hypothesis that is supported by multiple sources of data to say that this is the right thing to do scientifically, right? So individual, you know, who shouts the loudest, who is the best salesman in the company becomes less important, and what does the data show will probably become more important in the decision of what sort of projects to do in the first place. And I imagine there will be, you know, data milestones, and, you know, in the way projects are executed, that has this data been looked at, yes or no? Can you go forward, yes or no, right? So it's not so much about, you know, being convincing as a person. It's about what the data shows, you know, and that will determine what will be done. I think maybe that's part of the answer.
And this next question kind of expands on that. You just talked about challenges, but are there any big barriers in regards specifically to embedding AI in human healthcare?
Yeah. Certainly, human healthcare. Yeah. People, yeah. So okay. So where I'm coming from is, I guess not everybody will be wearing, you know, data collecting devices. Not everybody will be, you know, interested in giving stool samples, right, or blood samples, and understanding their health at this deep level, right? So I guess that could be one challenge if you want to make truly sort of tailored or more precision offerings. You know, of course, the individual also has to, you know, want to learn about themselves. Otherwise, how do they know what it is that they actually need on this sort of a data-driven level? That could be one thing. Barriers, well, there's always the barrier of, I think, you know, data privacy as well. We have to think about that a lot. You know, when you're starting to get people's, you know, questionnaire data, health data, you know, there's a lot of things that you have to take into consideration at all levels to get that right. It could be a barrier, certainly. And yeah, what else? I guess the general data availability just has to increase, right in general, and just the general diagnostics, right? Because if you say that I want to make a precision offering, then there should be a diagnostic that goes with that. Maybe in some cases it doesn't exist yet. Yes, it does exist for genes. It does exist for microbiota. But wouldn't it be cool to have some kind of an on-the-spot diagnostic as well, right? When you are there trying to make a decision, you could then say, hey, am I that kind of person that needs this product? So that could be also something.
Great, that makes sense. We're coming up on time, so we'll ask one more quick question here, back to publications. What determines a publication to be able to move forward through quality control measures?
What determines a publication to be able to move forward through quality control measures? Okay, yes, I understand. Yeah. So it was that, you start with, in this case, it was 40 something publications. You ended up with 10. It's okay. Are the methods clearly described in the publication? Does it look like it's reliable data? Are all the data and the metadata consistent as well, right? Are there any missing data? Are there sort of mislabelings and all that kind of thing? So all of these you have to take into consideration. And also you might be in your particular, study, your research question, be interested in particular metadata that you have to then link with the microbiota composition. So of course, you might end up eliminating a lot of publications because it simply doesn't have that kind of metadata.
All right, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. So since we're up at the hour now, I would encourage anybody else who has questions to hang on to them, because we will be revisiting some of these topics on December 8th with our speaker series panel and dialogue. We will be inviting back all of the speakers from the fall, including Kimmo, and we can continue to ask and answer questions there. But our next speaker will be Dr. Gail Taylor on November 10th. So we hope that you will be able to join us at that event. And thank you again for being here today, Kimmo. We really appreciate this very visionary talk and gave us all a lot to think about.
Thank you, pleasure.